If you're someone who's drawn to interesting opening ideas, this video is for you. In the last round of the US Championships, Grandmaster Awonder Liang shocked viewers with his first move choice against Dominguez. I was able to interview Awonder about his opening choice. This is what he had to say.
I was checking a lot of different things. Before the event, I considered not a3, but a different first pawn move. But yeah, I think it was a must-win game. And the thing is, Leinier looked so solid everywhere, and I thought I didn't have much chance in some big main lines because I actually just never see him get caught out and stuff like this. And so the thing with a3 is he has to think from move one, and so it's energy-wise very taxing. And I mean, as you saw in the game, like I came with some good idea, and I mean basically after move 15, like out of the opening, I had some basically winning position. And to me, it was like no accident. I think it's not an easy move to face. I think maybe it's not so obvious to the casual watcher, but I think during this event I was extremely well prepared. I mean, when I play lines, like even though they look a bit silly sometimes, like they do have very. I mean, I do think them out extremely carefully. And yeah, right before the game, I just called my coach. I was basically, kind of asking him permission to play this, and it was a 10-minute call. And like, the more I talked, basically, the more he was convinced, like, you have to try it. So it's like better than, it's almost like the best first move you can play. And so yeah, I think it's a little funny, it's a little shocking. And yeah, I think I basically did the best I could.
Now let's get to the game and see this interesting opening choice in action. 1a3. And it does have its benefits, especially, for instance, if you're a Sicilian player, how often colors reversed is the move a6 useful, and it's found in many Sicilians. After a3, Dominguez opted to face this first move oddity with d5. And quickly, we're going to get to a more standard opening position with bishop f4. And it's got the feel of a London system, but with a3, we haven't had a commitment yet of the b1 knight, and that is going to be where we could potentially fall in Jobava London waters, where a3 can be useful in many variations. Dominguez goes with a very principled move, c5, seen in Queen's Gambit and French structures, to strike the center, and white opts for the most flexible way to defend with e3, preparing for the f1 bishop to be able to get out. After queen b6, a threat is made against the b2 pawn. And we want to try to think about this position as, okay, we're justifying a3. How can we make the most out of our position? And I often like to recommend to my students the thinking process that Grandmaster Kotov recommended in Think Like a Grandmaster. You want to choose 3 candidate moves. And in the comparison of those candidate moves, look for the most forcing or aggressive move. Start with that line first. In this case, we have a direct problem. With the queen on b6, it is attacking the b2 pawn. So what is the best way, most aggressive way to deal with this problem? And very often, if you use this thinking process, you will find the optimal way to solve your problem. In this case, not b3, not queen c1. These are passive moves, secondary moves. The interesting knight c3 firmly lands us in Jobava London territory. And it says, you're welcome to take the pawn, because if black snatches that b2 pawn, what do you do here? Hopefully you see the very nice knight a4, where the queen has no say for treating squares. Best she has here is sacrificing for the rook. So back to the main game. Of course, one of the world elite players is not going to miss this tactic. Simply goes with bishop d7, potentially eyeing some key squares. This is the bad bishop in the structure, so any opportunity to trade it off for its counterpart, black's going to be looking for in the future. So now, rook b1, supporting that weak pawn and getting ready in the future to potentially push it. Knight c6, capture, capture, And now the most optimal square for the f1 bishop, bishop d3. And very often in my students' games, they're in the habit of always placing the bishop in front of the king. But often how we decide in Queen's Gambit, Slav structures, is can it be more aggressive on the d3 square? Much of the reason why white captured on c5 earlier was to assure that when this bishop reaches d3, there's going to be no kick, and we're not going to lose time. This is the most aggressive square for the bishop as it's slicing through the center and pointing to the king's side, where black's king inevitably will go in this. It's likely with the c-pawn missing, the black king's going to go kingside. Bishop e7, avoiding any potential tempo loss with b4, and after castles, castles, b4, gaining space. And we have left the opening phase at this point. Now we're in the middle game, and if you're a pause your video type of person, definitely start pausing after each black move and trying to think, using that recommended thinking process, what is the most aggressive path forward? Compare 3 moves, and in the process of comparing those 3 moves, hopefully you land on ideas that are played in the game, and you can follow in the footsteps of some of America's strongest players. So here, after rook fc8, we've got this potential X-ray on our c3 knight. But is it a problem yet? No. So hopefully you are looking at the most forcing move here, e4. Trying to break up the center, have an isolated pawn to play against maybe, or looking to push for a second time to try to get the strongest defender of the king's side to go away. Very flexible move. And here, the task for Grandmaster Dominguez is quite difficult. By engine estimation, it recommends a backwards move, knight d8, by far the most difficult moves to consider in chess, where the knight's safe, out of the way, and we have this pressure on the c3 knight. If defense, takes, in between move, in between move, and you can always tell when it's a computer line because it has all of these ornate in between moves that would require a tremendous amount of effort for a human to find, especially in a practical game like this, where we have an unclear position. In the main game, the far more natural and human response was played, knight d4, forcing matters, but we go from a roughly equal position to white has a slight nagging edge. So how best to continue here? Consider the most forcing moves first. Knight takes d4. So we've got a few different paths here, and all of them lead to a very similar plan. Say, for instance, queen takes d4, knight e2, and as the queen retreats, we get this very strong move, e5. Everything's coming together for the white position now, as black's having to go backwards. This d3 bishop is super strong and unleashed. This e5 pawn kicked away the best defender, and we start gradually looking for a kingside attack as the defenders fall away. In the main game, rook takes c3 was played, and going off of the theme we just saw with that sideline, hopefully you find the most aggressive way to continue here. e5. You go, well, what if a potential grab on d4? A tactical theme that you always want to be looking for is this bishop takes h7 with the discovery on the queen. And it's seen very often in the French defense as black breaks down that center. After e5, knight e8. And there are a couple of moves here to consider. Rook a1 just to defend the a3 pawn. It's not the worst thing in the world. But I like the move played in the game as it's more practical and it gives the opponent more room to go wrong. Bishop e3. Defending the knight, but also setting up a nasty discovery if the knight moves. So queen d8. Simple chess. We're just going to defend the pawn. And now g6. Dominguez solidifies the structure as well as gives this knight some room to breathe. Maybe the knight could reroute to a better square. Bishop d2, kicking the rook away. And where should we be playing here? The next series of moves really shows the class of Awonder as he takes full control over the position. You've got time. Improve the pieces to the maximum. Here, a4, gaining space. And after knight g7, what's the plan with this knight? What's the point? Wants to reach f5 or h5? So, prophylaxis. Take away the forward squares in the knight. Knight's not doing too much. f6, trying to potentially gain some squares for pieces. Why allow that? Queen b6. You're hitting our knight. Hey, what's the best way to defend the knight here? c3, keeping the bishop flexible. a5. Well, if we capture, we would be activating an opponent's piece that's been out of the game. But if we close it, we make it pretty much impossible for black to do anything on the queen side. So the center is locked, the queen side's locked, and we have the potential for a breakthrough on the king side. Seems like things are going very well for white. After rook f8, flexible, queen e2. Bishop c5, hitting our knight. Simple defense, bishop e3. And after queen c7, this is a critical moment. And I feel that this is an idea which is difficult for a human to consider because the c file is open. But seeing how the rest of the game went based off of tension, you have to be looking for that opportunity to favorably trade down to trade advantages. And I like this move recommended by the machine, knight b3. So it says, okay, we'll trade. You can have this pawn because I get this beautiful square for the knight, and white clearly has compensation and the attack continues. If black doesn't want to grab this pawn, say we have a move like rook a c8, we'll have to rooks a to c1, queen d8. We're fully flexible here and have an idea that we don't have in the main game, breaking with c4. So I think this was a critical moment to initiate a trade and give us some flexibility of ideas. In the main game, bishop d2 was played, and a lot of shuffling takes place by both players. And it seems as if white should have this breakthrough. And even by the engine estimation, if you turn it on, it's going, well, this is pawn and a half to 2 pawns advantage. But it can be difficult, especially when you're sitting there playing against one of the best players of this generation. How can you break through with white? No immediate breakthroughs. Slow and steady improvement. Wait for your opportunity. Locking the position. And very often, the machine was giving g5 and then trying to play for a c4 break. But anytime you play g5, it closes off the potential of you being able to break. Because very often, black's just going to be able to play knight h5 and say bishop e8, and even if you capture, it's hard to see how we're going to have a breakthrough. So I understand why g5 wasn't played in the game, but it ends up being a key move later, which turns a winning position, or much better position, into a lost position. The critical square. King g2, queen f2. As I said, good amount of shuffling and waiting for the opportunity. And Black is just making the most out of his cramped position. Bishop e8. And g5, this is one of the moments that the machine is screaming, okay, lock it down, you have no chance of losing, play for a c4 break later. Bishop f2. And as we're ready to finally play c4 and we're coordinated, what would you do with black here? If an idea is clear and you can take it away from the opponent, take it away. So attack the bishop. And I think black would be happy with a repetition here, but of course, white isn't. You should not be happy with a draw here. You've got the better position. Press on. Rook h1. And this next move has a bit of a problem to it. Now, I'm not sure of the time situation at this point because we're at move 40, but it could be that one or both players could be in time trouble. So this move, which would in the very least equalize for black, wasn't played. Could be black's just focusing on keeping tension in a practical game because he's playing for a win. From a worse position, I might add. Bishop takes d4, followed by queen a3. It seems like the best time to capture on d4, and we've got this target on c3. Black shouldn't be worse here. In the main game, bishop e8, just keeping an eye on that c6 square, staying a little bit of staying flexible, I should say. Again, g5 is a move to consider, but queen d3, and this is the key moment for black. As I said earlier, g5 is the critical square, and now with black playing g5, this clears a square for this bishop, who has been terrible the entire game, but he ends up being the hero of the story. Is pretty much no matter what white does, any reasonable move is going to be strongly met by bishop g6, setting up this nasty skewer. And after queen d2, as things begin to liquidate, white's trying to hold on, but every black piece, which was entombed just a few moves ago, come alive. And black safe, the attack continues, and after g takes f4, white resigned. Creativity is not always rewarded in chess. It's a cruel game. But after Grandmaster Liang's 1a3, I find myself wanting to try it, and I might in upcoming games. Hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you did.